Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you for joining us for today's ECI Live. Today we will be discussing a recently released Global Business Ethics Survey report, the state of ethics and compliance in the workplace, differences between small, medium, and large enterprises. My name is Erin Essen, and I'm the Vice President of Research and Analytics at ECI. And today I'm joined by Skip Lowney, who is our resident GBS expert and also a senior survey researcher at ECI. We also have two ECI members and practitioners who will be joining us for today's discussion. Alistair Raymond, Vice President and Chief Ethics Compliance Officer at Avangrid. Avangrid is a renewable energy service provider and utility company with 7,000 employees. Alistair has also worked at companies that are smaller, that fall into our definition of small enterprise, with 200 employees and 400 employees, respectively. Elizabeth Simon is Vice President of Compliance at First Key Homes. First Key Homes is a provider of single-family rental homes in the U.S. When Elizabeth joined the team, there were 600 employees, and it's quickly grown to 900. Elizabeth has worked at organizations before that are much larger, 60,000 employees. And so we look forward today to this discussion about the results and the perspectives and insights of our ethics and compliance practitioners. Before we get started, I'd like to share a little bit about our Global Business Ethics Survey. ECI has been conducting research with employees about workplace integrity since 1994. We've had different names for this research over the years. It was called the National Business Ethics Survey. And then in 2015, we went global and started surveying employees in different countries around the world. ECI conducts this research on a regular basis. We produce research reports, infographics that we call ethics stats, stats of the week, which we publish each week on the ECI webpage. And we also have country profiles. Be sure to check out www.ethics.org/GBS for more information. Today's study will be focusing on the results that were collected for the GBS in 2020. We have released a report last year that looked at the data overall and by the 10 different countries that we surveyed. Today's research is focusing on the US data only. And we're looking at the data by small organizations, medium-sized organizations, and large organizations to understand the differences in E&C programs and employee perspectives on ethics and compliance in the workplace based on the size of organization that they work for. This report and the research behind it was made possible through support of the Business Ethics Resource Center, BERC. BERC provides resources on its webpage. They're open to the public. Please be sure to look at those resources and access those materials at businessethicsresourcecenter.org. The GBS in its entirety is funded by 16 different organizations. We would like to thank the GBS funders. And also, if you're interested in funding this great research, please reach out to Shayla Woodson at swwoodson@ethics.org. With that, I will pass things over to Skip Lowney to get started on our discussion today.
Thank you, Evelyn. Again, just to reiterate, I'm Skip Lowney. I'm a senior researcher here at ECI. I've been here about, well, over 16 years. So have seen some of the earlier iterations of the GBS, the NBS of the day, and then this newest one, and was an active participant in helping with this report. So I'm here today to present some of the findings, and then really just it's about a discussion with our practitioners. And we also obviously want to hear from everybody who's on the call today or on this conference, to drop questions in to the chat. We will get to those, as many as we can, of course, and always, willing to answer any questions afterwards. If you're interested in reaching myself, I'm easy email, skip@ethics.org. So skip@ethics.org. So there's going to be something I missed. I'm sure it is. You can always see the report on our website, www.ethics.org, for those. And then this session will be recorded, and the PowerPoint's going to be available. But today, the basic content, the overview, we're going to look at ethics actions, and we'll just take a high-level view of these. Sometimes this is referred to as the ethics culture in an organization. We'll go into some detail about that. And then we're going to look at what we consider to be and are considered to be key outcomes in the ethics and compliance realm. So what's the level of pressure in the organization? Is there observed misconduct? And if there is it reported? And if it's reported, is there retaliation? These four key ethics outcomes really give insight into what's going on in an organization. And today we'll be looking at the results for the small, medium, and the large organizations, as well as some details about the specifics. So, some of the types of misconduct, some of the types of retaliation, we'll be looking at that. And the practitioners, Elizabeth and Al, are going to be giving their take on that, on those findings, but they're going to be also sharing their knowledge from their, again, as Evan mentioned, their past experience in organizations they've worked for and what they've done and where they're doing now. They'll be able to provide the context and some insight into why things might be the way they are. So last couple of sections, we're going to look at ethics and compliance programs. We're going to just do a basic overview of that. And then we'll look at employee empowerment, a small view into that, with a wrap up at the end, where Elizabeth and Al will have the chance to sort of say obviously some final thoughts, but also add some new information. So with that, I'm going to essentially shut myself off and turn it all over to you as we field our first poll. We see where you're from now in terms of geographic locations. Now, please tell us about your companies and where you work. So the question is, and I do hope it appears, at what size organization do you work? A small organization, that's one with fewer than 500 employees. A medium organization, which is 500 to 999 employees, basically 500 to 1,000. And then large, for purposes of our analysis in today, 1,000 or more employees. And for those of you who are independent consultants or might be a partner with another individual, not necessarily in a small firm, even though it is a small firm technically, you might list yourself as an independent consultant. So please submit your votes. We'll give that a moment. We're about 3/4 of the way through our voters, and we are really getting, predominantly it's going to be large employees. That's not going to change. Right now it's about 60% are in the large pool, about 25% are in the small organizations, and then 10% in medium, and then a little under that 7% say they're in other organizations, so maybe operating independently. So those who are in the medium group, we have some specific findings for you that we hope you will take away and share with other individuals in medium-sized organizations, because there's some interesting findings there. So with that, let's move forward. So the first piece, again, I said I was going to talk about is culture. When we look at this, this is essentially saying that in all of these three sized organizations across the US, small, medium, and large, that the individuals are asked, so the way the survey works is individuals are asked about the behaviors of other people in their organization. So they're asked if they see them talking about ethics, setting a good example of ethics. I'm sure many of you know these things, but supporting others in their ethical efforts, not tolerating retaliation, being held accountable, holding others accountable. So with this constellation of actions, the survey participants are asked, do you see these other individuals undertaking these behaviors? And these represent the 15%, the 1 in 7 employees in each of these sized organizations on average, who say that they strongly agree that these actions are taking place. They firmly believe that their supervisor is setting a good example of ethical conduct as an example of an action that they would strongly agree with. I'd like to move into the details, because that's not uniform across small, the medium and large organizations, nor is it uniform when it comes to the different categories or groups of people in organizations. This is showing that if you look at the left bar in any one of these three, well, the three groups or clusters are small organizations on the left, medium organization results in the middle, and large organization results on the right. And you see the numbers range from about 15% to a little over 20%, closer to almost 25% there at the highest. But this is saying that if we look at the left set of bars, in a small organization, 16% of those respondents strongly agree that the top managers in their organization are exhibiting these ethical actions in the environment. In medium-sized, in that same group, that small organizations, 18% are saying that their supervisors exhibit these actions, and 21% are saying that their coworkers are exhibiting these actions. This is pretty typical that we see a smaller number of employees strongly agreeing that top management undertakes these actions. Most people don't have interactions with top management, but we do see this one odd condition here about medium-sized organizations. We would have expected that 17%, this is the center bar and the center set of the graph, 17% said that their supervisors undertake these actions. Based on the pattern seen in the small and the large organizations, we would have expected this to be 21% higher there in that shaded area. So with that in mind, and thinking about these different actions, I'd like to share this question and hear from Elizabeth and Al. So give me a moment and I'll read out the question to the best of my ability. What are your thoughts? And if you want to, Elizabeth and Al, hold off and maybe do some more detailed response when we get to later questions, please do so and we'll move forward. But what are your thoughts about the dynamics of the cultures in the organizations and the different size, and especially in this medium-sized organization, that might explain this sort of difference? Certainly the pattern is people don't know about top managers, so that's a lower number. But what about this one oddity in the middle group, and then just in general about organizations and culture?
Yeah, Skip, I'll take that first. So I'm in a medium-sized organization, as Everin said earlier, and medium-sized organizations are in a very challenging place. They've kind of broken through the smaller startup mentality, but their owners and investors and shareholders expect a lot from them to try to get to that larger organization size. And this puts a lot of pressure on those frontline supervisors to perform. And so I think the supervisors who may be more incentivized on a transactional level versus the top level leaders who are more incentivized more on an overall strategic kind of performance level may have the because of the incentives that they're given on the transactional level, may have a desire to really hit those numbers, those metrics, and may do anything to do that. So I think that's kind of what I was thinking when I saw that gap in the supervisors from what you would expect from the other organizations. You may not have that as much in a smaller organization or a larger organization as you do in that medium size. It's really trying to break through and get to that larger size.
Mm-hmm. Al, do you have something that you have some thought about this, or would you want to hold off until we dig into some of the other slides?
No, excuse me. I agree with Elizabeth. I think that's right on. I mean, a couple of things I may just add to that. When you look at some of the qualities of a medium-sized organization, versus when it was smaller, you're definitely a growth set, but also you are dealing with a much larger expansion of transactional work and business processes. Often using tools and controls that were designed for a smaller organization. And so that I think that just exacerbates the types of pressures in the day-to-day that supervisors are facing. When you hit that spot between the small organization and the much larger one that has got to the point where it can invest in some of that supporting control framework that helps the supervisor.
Very good. In our past GBS work, one of the findings that we have come across is that when individuals perceive supervisors and managers in their organizations talking about meeting targets and goals and rewards and getting to that next objective, those individuals say that they're also more likely to see misconduct in their organization. Mm-hmm. Thus, that is a sign that there's probably some things that are not quite right there, and so the ethical conduct of others is questioned to a greater degree.
Yeah, I mean, that's something you're with a smaller organization. It's kind of like the small town mentality. I think there's a lot more opportunity for that leadership influence to be there with respect to misconduct and people knowing each other's business. Then when you get to that mid.
Yeah. So let's go on and let's look at this something specific here. Let's look at pressure to bend the rules. We have a situation here where 52% of the respondents said that they felt pressure to compromise the organizational standards in some way. That is, that they had to do something wrong. Not just they feel pressure to do their jobs, but they had to do something. They feel pressure to do something wrong to achieve to be successful. And whereas in small and large organizations, it's at 30% and 28%. So they have much more in common in that way. So thinking a little bit about that, I guess I would like to also add, and then which you're not going to see here, is that when we asked this question, we asked whether they strongly agreed that they felt pressure, agreed, and then down through strongly disagreed. This is a combination of those who agree and strongly agree that they feel pressure. The neutral responses across all three organizations were about 12% each. The disagree responses varied. So in disagree in a small organization, 55% disagreed that they felt pressure. In a large organization, 61% disagreed that they felt pressure. In a medium organization, 34%. So far fewer in a medium-sized organizations said that they disagree that they felt pressure, which works with the 52%. So it's not that they went to neutral, it's they went to disagree, or they didn't choose disagree, I should say. So thinking about that and about pressure and what's happening, what are your thoughts about some sources here on this and insights into why it is this way for these employees?
Well, I think you perform to what you're paid for. So kind of going back to what I said earlier, if you're incentivized to hit the metrics on the daily, weekly, monthly basis, then you're going to be more likely to and have more frequent opportunities to bend the rules to get to those metrics. So I think in the medium-sized companies where it's very, very focused on metrics trying to, continue to grow, to get into that larger organization space, that you're going to have a lot more opportunities for misconduct in just trying to hit those metrics. And I mean, senior management has all year to perform, but supervisors may not have that, and they have, the smaller quarterly or monthly goals that they have to hit. So they focus more closely on their own part of the business rather than the company as a whole, and might bend the rules in their space.
Mm-hmm. So, Al,
Yeah, for me,
yeah, go ahead.
I could just add on that, because again, I think Elizabeth really hit that nail on the head with respect to the metrics and incentives. Large organizations, by and large, have gotten to the point where they've learned some serious lessons along the past on their way to becoming big, right? And so there's some institutional memory, and I think part of it also with respect to some of that pressure to commit misconduct, you may see some of that in risk aversion, and to what extent are some of the risks associated with misconduct less better recognized at a larger organization where perhaps you have some additional leadership that's very conservative with respect to some of that risk.
Interesting. I wanted to, since I know we'll be doing a little bit of this later on, but some ideas and thoughts about it. But while we're here, what do you have, or do you have any thoughts about what organizations could do, these mid-sized organizations could do to help change that perspective that supervisors might have on a more transactional basis and shift their understanding to perhaps that strategic objective?
Yeah, it's a difficult thing. I think one of the things that you can try to do is ensure that ethics is built into those incentive plans. So if the goals are make the sales, well, are those viable sales that will last into the future? And if the client is gone after 90 days, then it's not really worth it. Or if maybe they're not even a real client, but you're just padding your numbers to get to whatever the incentive goal is. So I think building in some kind of ethical related piece to the incentive might be something that can help in ensuring that you're getting, first of all, ultimately good clients, right? Mm-hmm. And then making sure that they're not just padding the numbers or going around the system to get their to get to their incentive.
Very true.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think particularly for some of that middle management level, I think that it's so important for the leadership to continuously re-emphasize that the numbers are they're a metric, but the how and the values behind it are really what the leaders should care about. Sometimes you may speak to people who kind of take it for granted at a leadership level that people should recognize the importance of doing things the right way. But part of the job of leaders is to be repetitive and just constantly reiterate to people under a lot of pressure that doing things the right way is more important sometimes than actually hitting the goal. It's a hard thing to say, at a medium-sized organization to do that, but I think it's very critical in terms of long-term sustainability.
I see. We are going to be talking about program elements later, and training is certainly one of those elements, which is an area, of course, where awareness of thinking about the strategy, embedding ethical decision making and other ethical behaviors into everyday practices, can be brought to supervisors and managers, middle level managers' attention. So I guess I maybe will say, let's hold and think about. Maybe there's an opportunity to come back and look at what is going to happen between a small organization and a medium-sized organization and a large organization. As you're talking about this transitioning, what can the ethics and compliance officer do in an organization? So when we get to the program elements, maybe we can come back to this. So we're going to move on to our next poll, and in this, if everyone would again click on the polls tab, please, and that should disappear momentarily. So this is a compared with before. So thinking back to the autumn of 2020, about 6 months into the pandemic, and the reason for that is that this survey and the results that we're looking at today were collected in August and September of 2020. So these are older data, and they were certainly influenced by what was taking place already, the 6-8 months into the pandemic and sort of the lockdowns and what was really started in January, February. So thinking back, about 6 months in, what impact did the pandemic have on the level of observed misconduct in your organization? Did misconduct significantly increase? Did it slightly increase? Was there no change in the level of misconduct? Did misconduct slightly decrease, or did misconduct significantly decrease, or are you not sure? Maybe you weren't there in that organization at the time, or or have some other reason there. So yeah, please throw in a vote. Okay, so again, we're about 3/4 of our participants, maybe a little less, have answered this. And the lead answer, misconduct levels did not change. So whatever was happening prior to the pandemic, about 6-8 months into it, things hadn't changed. The same level of misconduct was taking place. A slight decrease was the next number here, 14% chose that. And then the remaining three answers are 8 and 9%. So slightly increased 9%, significantly increased 8%, so that's a total of 17, and then significantly decreased, that's 8. So overall didn't change, about 30%, increased 17%, and decreased 22%. So thinking back about that in your own recollections, but I would also say maybe we want to think about now as well, because we're looking at something older. But what are your recollections about misconduct during that period, from your own experiences and what you heard others saying, and what you were reading in the papers, or the papers, that's old school, what you were reading on your phone, or from other sources? So please.
Yeah, so I was actually in a large organization at the beginning of the pandemic and transitioned to my medium-sized organization in the middle of the pandemic. And so I kind of got a flavor of both of those size organizations with regards to observed misconduct and reported misconduct. And initially, when the pandemic hit, what I saw in our reporting of misconduct numbers is that we had a decrease from prior periods in our most significant category, which was, harassment, discrimination, the kind of the HR related categories. And then we saw an increase in the health and safety related categories as more people were talking about COVID related issues, whether it be, somebody at my office came in and they tested positive and you didn't tell me, or I didn't have enough PPE, or whatever the case may have been. And so we saw a lot of an increase in those health and safety related complaints that we didn't hardly get any of prior to the pandemic. But a pretty big decrease in harassment and discrimination because people weren't there in person. It's a little harder to maybe harass someone over a video call. So it was, I would say the overall level decreased, but there was a huge change in the types of cases that we were seeing early on in the pandemic.
Okay, so before Al, you have an answer, I'm going to bring up the results from the report and the survey that we have, and you can see the medium-sized, they had more likely to see misconduct, and the small and large less likely. And then there are some specific types here. Elizabeth alluded to that generally. So Al, your thoughts about this, please.
About the pandemic or the slide itself?
Either. Well, these are again these sort of pandemic, but yeah, I guess maybe first the pandemic. Anything particular?
Well, let me just say
these types.
Yeah, let's see what the pandemic are. People recall there was a lot of concern, I think, in the industry about people being at home and whether or not there would be like productivity issues or financial fraud issues, and I think by and large much of that never happened. At least we didn't experience it. I think that really was an indicator of really resilience of culture in the organization when you go into that type of once in a lifetime event. Our organization is really built around keeping the lights on, right? And so there's a very strong mission component to what we do, and the emergency preparedness is really part of our DNA. So I mean, to a large extent, the pandemic beginnings of it were really an extension of what we were already doing, and it was during the winter time, so it was much like the way we address storms. So we found complaints to in the helpline to virtually disappear for a while before they largely got back to just a normal volume. But with respect to financial issues or like other types of concerns, we didn't see an increase in it. I think that was really just representative of the type of culture we had.
Okay, and just to say this, to be clear, your organization consists of a lot of essential workers. Would that be accurate to say?
Right.
Yeah. And a lot of them are already working independently. They're out in the field, or they're not necessarily in an office working, and then sent to work from home. Okay.
Yeah, that's right. And we, to a large extent, much of their challenge was, for example, like if you responded to an outage, finding ways to do it with only one person in each vehicle, right? And so those were the types of challenges that they were dealing. I think it really, some of the background issues that you deal with in a helpline really kind of dried up because people were really focused on mission.
Absolutely. Okay. So to the point that you made, Elizabeth, about the types of misconduct, we see a lot of these here. Let's call management lying to employees, favoritism, abusive behavior, HR type, categorizing them. We do see that the medium group is definitely higher with regard to all of these. Not a good thing to see there, but we do see also a higher number of health safety violations. These are the top 6 types of misconduct that were observed by participants in the survey. And you see they range from 34% in small organizations seeing favoritism down to 22% in those sized organizations seeing health and safety violations. And then the other numbers in each of the columns for each of the types of misconduct, with favoritism being the leading type of misconduct and health and safety of the 26 that we asked about. So.
Yeah, and Skip, and looking at the overall slide with the medium-sized organizations having such a much higher number, I kind of wonder if misconduct gets lost in the mix in a larger organization, or maybe becomes more of the norm where it's not seen as misconduct. In my previous company, we had plenty of cases, way more than I have in my current medium-sized company that I work for now. But because of the scale, I actually have more cases per 100 employees in my current company, the medium-sized company, than I ever had at the larger organization. So because we have such a small number of employees versus the other company that had 60,000, or the one that I worked for before that had 125,000, I feel like it gets lost in the mix, or maybe people just aren't reporting as a high of a rate as you would at a smaller company or a medium-sized company.
Al, I see you nodding. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting take, Elizabeth. It's a really good point in terms of especially like normalized behavior. When I look at the numbers and the types of misconduct that you've identified in that table, many of those to me are associated with high pressure situations, involving a lot of growth and a lot of issues that a supervisor would be dealing with without necessarily a lot of oversight. The other thing I see about those types of misconduct that you've identified in the table is that several of them are the types of issues that arise when you have processes that are increasing in volume without necessarily the level of control that you might have at a large organization, such as the hiring process, vendor selection, where you may see more of that conflict of interest, favoritism, hiring practices, where when you get to be a much larger company, you've started to really clamp down on some control over the process. And so that may be part of what you're seeing as well.
Yeah, that is a really, really good point. I mean, I think next time we do the survey, we should have some question about, are you in a high growth mode, or you're just a cash cow, or, that kind of thing. Because you're absolutely right. In the high growth mode, which we've been in for a while now, you have a lot of those types of things that are possible because people are very metrics driven. They're really trying to grow. They may not be scaling staff as much as they should be in order to meet that growth. So there's a lot of opportunities for these types of misconduct to come out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you're lacking some level of bureaucracy that, in large extent, is intended to reduce some of that misconduct that you're seeing.
Right.
I mean, when I think about some of these things that when we do see them, they tend to be at more of our less centralized locations, where perhaps there is less of that opportunity to have this centralized corporate oversight.
Yes, we've certainly heard a lot here from individuals at large organizations who talk about those remote or work locations where a small group of individuals develops their own culture, and what the norm is there is not necessarily the norm for what the organization and central and ethics and compliance accepts as a norm. Actually, we have a comment that's come in from one of the attendees talking about the industry. Certainly, we're just looking here at small, medium, and large, but the industries, those who have work from home environments, those who had to work and continue to work, say, in a manufacturing plant altogether, or, as we just talked about your situation now, where in your industry, individuals who are out there, some of them more on their own than, and sort of continuing on that in that same way. So, So I'm going to move forward here because what happens after people observe misconduct? They report or they don't report. That's not at all humorous, but there is the case where people are reporting, and in this case, this shows that most reporting took place in medium-sized organizations. Not as much took place in small, and even less took place in large organizations. We have 93%, 87%, and 80%. We also have information shown here about where individuals reported, and that the top place, and everybody I think knows this already and probably has this experience in their own organization, is the supervisor. And that's the person most people are comfortable with, familiar with. That's the person they go to. But that individual may also be the perpetrator of that misconduct. So there's, there are other places that people go. Higher management, that typically turns out to be the second most sought after or used source or resource. But then people do go to the others, the human resources, legal, ethics and compliance. The hotline is typically lower down there. And by the way, this was a select all that apply type question, which is why the numbers don't add up to 100%. So an individual, this is clearly showing that individuals went to more than one place. So maybe they went to their supervisor, but then they might have gone to the government regulator or the hotline as well. They may have gone to all of these places, in the worst scenario. They felt like they weren't being listened to. But these are pretty standard, supervisor, higher management, the different groups, hotline. People don't really go to the government or the regulators. That has been changing. We hear from some people that some of the incentives being offered for whistleblower bounties is impacting some of that. But I'm not sure that we have full data on that everywhere yet, but there's some evidence that is encouraging that. Having said put that out there. So let's see. I think so this is sort of speculation, but also looking toward offering some suggestions. What are your thoughts, I guess, obviously, about what the numbers you see here, but then what do you think these organizations can do to help change some of these numbers? I mean, we see differences where in medium-sized organizations, 44% go to higher management, whereas 35 and 37% in small and large organizations go there. So we see some differences. What might explain why those numbers are different, And if you want to change them, what are your thoughts about shifting some of that reporting pattern?
So first of all, I like to say I love to see these numbers so high, because when you have a high percentage of reporting of misconduct, then you're going to be able to solve the problems that are happening in the company before they become bigger. So I always say a high reporting rate is a good thing, and love to see that the numbers are all fairly high. About the medium size being higher, I think in medium-sized companies, the hierarchy is a little more flat than the large organizations. So that doesn't surprise me that they may have a higher reporting rate, particularly to the senior management versus the supervisor. I think what surprises me about this is that the smaller organizations are higher than the medium, because the hierarchy in a smaller organization is even flatter. So maybe the smaller organizations, most employees, direct supervisors are their senior management. Anyway, in my company, higher management is much more available to employees than in my previous larger company. So I can see where employees might go to that higher management level more often than they would at my previous larger companies. And oftentimes in larger companies, they are encouraging reporting to supervisors first before going to other mechanisms. And so in that case, people might be more comfortable going to their supervisors first if they're not the ones that are involved in the misconduct.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you're right, Elizabeth. When I look at those numbers, what I see, there's probably more standardization in the reporting mechanisms at a larger organization, because they've kind of been through that evolution. The smaller organizations, certainly flatter, and so people just who to go to, right? Because you walked down the hallway from that person half an hour ago. What you're seeing, these numbers could be just speaking to the greater variation in management structure at a medium-sized organization versus what we would stereotype for a large or small category company. One thing I'll say about the variation in numbers is knowing that it's a select all type of question, I'm not surprised, right? That you would have that kind of variation. If someone is going to make a report at a medium-sized organization to, say, a supervisor or HR, and they feel that it's not effective, they're going to report to another place and take a more shotgun type of approach to getting the issue resolved. So I think that in terms of advice, if you found these numbers to be undesirable, really just focusing on just being effective, quicker, and better coordinated when you get the report in the first place, whoever gets it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think another way to look at this is that with the high percentage of people who reported the misconduct in the medium companies, it may be an indicator that employees believe they can actually affect change in that company, in that sized company. So more of them would be willing to report it. Whereas in a smaller company, they're so closely held to the owners can make change. So maybe that the perception is that nothing will be done. I don't know. I know with my previous organizations, when they were larger, when you observe misconduct, people may not have reported it because they didn't feel that anything would be done. It's too large of a company. Changes aren't going to be made. If I, report this, it's going to get lost in the mix. But in a medium-sized company, we move fast. We're always looking for feedback to improve, to grow. And with that mentality, I think people may feel more comfortable speaking up because they believe something will actually be done about it.
And if I'm following right, that's that flatter organization that there's maybe 4 levels of management, and I'm underestimating or understating. Whereas in a large organization, there might be 12 levels of management. And so when there's 4, exactly. You're talking to somebody who actually has that power and that ability to make a change.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people wear a lot of hats in medium-sized organizations. So I have 4 different things that kind of my compliance team works on. So I have 4 different hats that at any given time that I could be wearing. And when people come to me and say, hey, I think there's something that can be done around this, even if it's not my area of expertise, and a lot of times I'll just, help them out or give them what, the answers that they need to get. And that doesn't happen, I think, in a larger organization. It's like, oh, well, don't talk to me, talk to that guy over there because he owns that. I think there's a little bit of that also potentially.
Okay. So, we're going to hit on this next subject. We have a question, poll question. So if everybody would go to the poll, please. This one is thinking back again to the autumn of 2020, the pandemic, 8 months in. About 6 months in, what happened? What impact did the pandemic have on the level of perceived retaliation for reporting misconduct? I mean, maybe it's not what impact, but what was the difference you saw? Retaliation significantly increased compared to before the pandemic, slightly increased, levels didn't change, retaliation slightly decreased, or retaliation significantly decreased, or you're not sure. So, what happened regarding retaliation that you saw when after the pandemic was basically in full mode affecting everybody? And we're coming up with something similar here. Retaliation levels didn't really change, 37%. 45% aren't sure. Again, there might be several reasons for that. If you're in a small organization, or maybe these individuals weren't there at the time, or retaliation is also something that, and I guess if you're in a small organization of 50 people, might be such a rarity that if there's one event, how do you categorize that? Is that more compared to zero? So however the reasons are, levels didn't change, was predominant, 36%. Slight decrease, 8%. Significant decrease, nobody selected that, or if they did, it was one person and it's not registering here. So slight increase and significant increase, about 9% between the two of those. So no change, and then about decrease and increase about the same, 9%. So given that, I will move us forward to our information about retaliation and what we found from the survey. We saw that 90% in medium-sized organizations of reporters, these are individuals who saw something, then reported it, experienced retaliation, versus 80% and 78% in small and large organizations. And regarding the types, they're pretty consistent. No matter what size organization you were in, 20% or so said this is what it was. Being ignored by others, being given an unfavorable assignment. So again, 20 to 25% of these reporters said it was one of these things. And again, this is a select all that apply. So we have maybe 10 minutes left. So I will also put out this second point here about reporting the retaliation. When we see 97% in medium-sized organizations reported the retaliation that happened to them, and 93 and 93% in small and large organizations. I'll add that in ECI's work, we typically see numbers around 90-95% of individuals do report retaliation. So all of that said, these big differences about retaliation, the types that people are seeing, the likelihood that it's the same everywhere. And I will also add one more thing, that the more places an individual goes, the more likely they are to experience retaliation. You tell one person, maybe you'll have a 50-50 chance of being retaliated against. You tell two people, and suddenly your odds are now 75%. You tell 6 people, and your chances go over 90% likelihood, or there's a 90% or greater likelihood you're going to be retaliated against. So all of this, dropping all of that information, and we know that so much does come from supervisors. What are ways that you think can help, either because not all retaliation is real, what are ways that you think could help employees understand that maybe what's happening to them from their supervisor or from someone else isn't retaliation? That's a certain question, and then anything else to this? There's a lot here.
Yeah, I think in the smaller organizations, they're less likely to have appropriate training on what retaliation actually means, which could skew the perceived retaliation and also cause retaliation by various reporting locations, such as the supervisor. I mean, I'm kind of surprised by the results because you would think that most retaliation happens by the supervisor. I mean, 3 of the retaliation types are caused by the supervisor. It's often the supervisor that gives or withholds assignments as well. So it's 4 of those different types. And the larger organizations have more reports made to the supervisors, yet the large organizations had the lowest perceived retaliation. So that's kind of surprising. I love seeing the 90% numbers in the reporting rates, which I think makes perfect sense because these people probably reported the first issue before. And so they're familiar with the reporting mechanisms or the reporting channels. So when they do get retaliated against, then they go ahead and report it. I think it also makes sense that the more places an employee reports, the more possible retaliation could happen. If they're reporting it to the supervisor and HR and legal, there are more people involved that could, try to ignore or hide the issues or, retaliate against someone. But I think to your question about what can organizations do to minimize retaliation, I think it really comes down to training and appropriately training people about what it looks like to be retaliated against. And then also training those supervisors about how when somebody is reporting something, you can't retaliate, and this is what it looks like.
Yeah, I think those are great observations. I found the results somewhat surprising myself as well. I think one thing when I look at the table, similar to what we were discussing earlier with respect to types of misconduct, is that these forms of retaliation are also entirely consistent with a high pressure, productivity driven work environment in terms of what could happen to people who may retaliate against, or and perhaps the perception is that they're not pulling the load along with everybody else. I know that's entirely a possibility. But with respect to, in addition to training, with respect to how to prevent it, one thing that you have when you have a more centralized independent function at a large organization, such as a corporate human resources department or a corporate compliance department, is you can have some additional independence in intervention to prevent retaliation, because there's a very significant amount of resource and priority placed on keeping an eye on your more problematic supervisors, and so that's something I think that you may be seeing at the larger organizations, in addition to training.
Okay. So we have just a few minutes left, and we might have some questions from the audience. So I will take us forward to this next piece, which has to do with program elements, and thinking about program elements and small organizations and what they might commit towards resources as well as personnel. Some of this very small organizations, 30 individuals, probably are not going to have a full-time ethics and compliance officer, but they'll have a dedicated individual. Medium organizations might start to have a small team, some part-time. So thinking about that, what are your thoughts here about resources, program elements, individuals, as well as here we have training, we have evaluation on ethical conduct, which is a whole different ball of wax, in many ways, from a code of conduct. Now you're saying to somebody, okay, we're going to look at your behavior from the past year and say, was it ethical? And we're going to evaluate you in their performance evaluation process. So thinking about helping these organizations transition, or as they're transitioning from small to medium to large, or if you're a large organization, making sure that the program elements are working, they're effective.
Yeah, I think that the first thing that stands out to me on here is that training is the number 1 and written standards are number 2. And how can you have training without having some kind of standard to train against? So I think the one of the basic foundational elements of any compliance program is a code of conduct and a hotline. And when I first started at my medium-sized company, we didn't even have a code of conduct. That was the first thing that I put in place. So I think making sure that you have the guidelines that employees are expected to follow in a very concise, document that they can go to and reference as needed is super important. I think if I was saying, how to start about improving, along the line, you see the small is the smallest percentage, and then the large is the largest percentage, which makes perfect sense, like you were saying, Skip, because they've got probably more resources in a larger organization dedicated to compliance and ethics. and making sure that you've got those written standards in place, and so that people can know what to do, and then train on those standards going forward.
Yeah, I look at that table and it just speaks to evolution. Like at some point you start hitting the boxes on what makes for an effective program, and as the larger you get, the more time you've had to implement. I think something that I look at, I find interesting is that evaluation of ethical conduct number, and how it really doesn't change much between the medium and large organizations. And I still think it really kind of demonstrates to me, really that's probably one of the areas of challenge that we've had as an industry in terms of figuring out how to do that effectively in a standardized way across companies. But the other ones, I think, it's really just a matter of evolution in time. I did notice someone asked a question in the chat related to that about, what kind of metrics can you provide that are not financial, right? That would promote, your program, and things like personal development, team development, culture related metrics. Those are things that, as I've seen in large organizations, actually get implemented into people's performance objectives in addition to performance, as a way to try to promote a non-productivity minded incentive for supervisors.
And something you said earlier, Elizabeth, about sort of bringing the ethics and compliance into the daily activities. You didn't use that word, but the transactional aspect of it. How do you change it from being transactional to being strategically minded? You're thinking about ethics and compliance as a driver of your decision, and that evaluation is one way to make people think about it. But then there are just the daily practices, because if those performance evaluations are taking place every 6 months, that may not be enough to reinforce or to raise the significance or raise the importance of that effort in an individual's mind, whereas a daily or monthly or training might be a way to bring that into their daily work activities.
Yeah, there just needs to be some kind of ethics and compliance component to those incentives, because that's, like I said, people will do what they're paid to do. And if they're paid to hit those incentives, then as long as you've got some kind of ethical related aspect to it, then they'll do it the right way versus just getting it done and doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Elizabeth, to your point, as for a medium sized organization that's really focused on numerical figures, turning your ethics and culture priorities into numbers is part of what you have to do when you're working with business leaders who themselves are, quantitatively driven.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I will stop us here. We have about 2 minutes left, and I know that Everett will be back to just give us a wrap up. But I wanted to say, did you have some final pithy, wonderful thing to say to everybody, that you think hasn't been said yet?
So I would just encourage ethics and compliance professionals in smaller and medium-sized companies that it's a lot of rolling up your sleeves and getting the work done yourself. That's what I found when I came in. I had one other team member on my team. So you don't have, an army of people to do the work. You don't have a huge budget to buy elaborate trainings and awareness campaign materials or other things like that. A lot of it has to be done in-house. Partner with your marketing team. I found that to be very, very helpful, marketing and comms, to help, get some of that done on a smaller budget. And then my final advice would be just build relationships with the leaders of each of the functional areas within your company, because the more you build those relationships and explain the importance of ethics and culture, the more likely they will be to come to you when there are risks and concerns. And that's really what your goal should be as an ethics and compliance professional.
Wow.
Great. Yeah, and let me add to that. First of all, somebody made the comment in the chat, and I agree that it's, when you're looking at the size of the organization, there's a much larger difference I would expect between a small organization of 50 and one of 400 versus between a 400 and 600 size employee, right? So there's a lot of generalization here, but I think the data around workplace misconduct and ethics, I think, shows that your primary factors, variables, are culture, like opportunity for misconduct and, and other controls around, say, like inspections and audits and some of the things that really are investment in systems. And until you're at that point, I think you're going to get your biggest bang for your buck, really focusing on the middle and lower management levels and building awareness and culture. And that's where you can more easily involve other leaders in the company. You can kind of really try to build on these challenges before you get large, and it gets just harder to do. That's really, I think, where I would focus as a small or medium-sized company. Knowing that the more support for that you get culturally in your leadership, the easier it will be for them to want to invest in all the other controls and systems that will help protect you.
Very good. Thank you both. I appreciate it. I'm going to pass it over to Everin, and really appreciate all that you contributed in. So.
Yes, thank you very much, Elizabeth, Alistair, and Skip. We received a lot of questions. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time to answer those. So we'll see about how we can get some of those answers to you. Thank you for attending today. It's been a very enlightening discussion. If you want to access the report, again, go to ethics.org/GBS, and you'll be able to find the report or find a path to the report. Again, I'd like to say thank you to Burke for providing the support to produce this report and release these data. And their website is businessethicsresourcecenter.org. And then for a few housekeeping items, if you go under apps on the platform, you will be able to access the slides from today's session, as well as the CEU credit for attending today's session. And look out for GBS 2022. We're getting ready to start the data collection for that, and we'll have new data and hopefully more countries as well that we'll be able to bring you this data for. Thank you again. Have a wonderful rest of the day or evening, wherever you are, and we look forward to seeing you next time.